It has been well over a year since I have last taken a look at the Akaso Brave 4, but I still get quite a lot of comments about it on the channel, so I guess it's time for a revisit then. I've been using this on and off every now and then, but I've never really used it as my main camera or for anything serious. I guess that's primarily because I usually record everything on my phone because the video quality on my phone is pretty good. But still, I guess there have been some use cases where I could use a tiny camera every now and then. Now, my opinions about the build quality have largely remained unchanged. I still think Akaso would have done a better job with the build quality of this because it still feels plasticky and easy to break. After usage for a year, the buttons have gotten really wiggly and loose, and they don't feel as tactile as they did before. The lithium-ion batteries have also taken a hit, and that's primarily because of the heating issues that this thing has. Now that's expected with many devices of this size. Even premium point-and-shoot cameras from reputable brands like Sony tend to heat up a lot. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You ideally need to keep this in one place to record long hours of footage, which you otherwise couldn't do with your smartphone or your main camera. The main reason why I still don't use this is the UI. Since there is no touchscreen, you just have to rely on the buttons to navigate through the UI, but even that has been implemented very poorly. You just have to press this mode button which cycles through the menus, and if you by mistake pressed it at the wrong time and you went out of the menu that you wanted to change, well, tough luck. You have to go through all the menu once again and cycle back to it. It doesn't go back in any way. And some of the features are pretty buggy and they don't work. It's primarily because of the software that ruins the experience, because when it does work, the camera is quite decent. The 4K video caps out at 24 FPS, which is quite decent, although the exposure roll-off doesn't really please the eye. You can use this in a very evenly lit room or when you're outdoors where there is plenty of sunlight, but if you're in an environment where there are shadows and sunlight mixed up, then this camera does a pretty bad job of exposing for the highlights. The white balance sometimes is pretty decent. It manages to keep the accurate color tones, but it usually lands in a slightly reddish area if you leave it on auto. There are settings to change the exposure and white balance, but you have to, as I mentioned, go into the settings with this painful menu. There is no shortcut to change the exposure if you suddenly find yourself in a bright environment and you want to expose for the scene. This feels less like a point-and-shoot camera and more like a old clunky manual camera. And speaking of manual, it would have been nice to have some kind of a manual focus, if not autofocus. This being an action camera, which is meant to capture far-off objects, its focal point is fixed to a minimum of say 1 feet, beyond which it cannot focus to nearby objects, and you can't really manually set the focus either. So if you want to shoot something up close, or if something accidentally gets close to the camera, it will be. There is a monochrome display on the front which gives you some details like whether the built-in Wi-Fi hotspot is on or how long the camera has been recording for and stuff like that. Just to give you an idea of what's going on with the camera when you are facing it to yourself, for instance. And that does work pretty well. Since the camera has a 170-degree field of view, you can easily get yourself in focus just by keeping it at say 1.5 feet from your face. But even if you are okay with the mediocre image quality for some reason, you can't use it as a backup vlogging camera because the audio sounds like this. But unfortunately this thing doesn't have any kind of a headphone jack, so this is the audio that you're stuck with, which is from the built-in microphone. And nothing great can be said about the built-in stabilization as well. There's obviously no optical stabilization and it relies on EIS, but even when that is enabled, it leads to more software crashes than usual. Now I've been recording with things for a while, so I can keep my hands relatively steady to get decently steady footage, but you can't just use it as a self-sustaining system outdoors and just forget about it. You have to be mindful of what the camera is seeing, otherwise you'll just end up with a shaky footage that you can't even use, provided you decide to use this in the first place. Pretty much the only good thing that I found about this is the number of accessories that it comes with. One of the most useful things that I've seen included with this camera is this battery charger. It comes with a spare battery and a micro USB connector which can charge up the batteries externally. So you can have the batteries charged outside the camera when you're not using it. Now you can charge the camera with a micro USB connection plugged into the wall as usual, but it's just nice to have an alternate battery ready to go, which you can just swap with the existing battery if you're running low. Now since obviously I couldn't use it for mainstream vlogging and stuff, I decided to explore the other possibilities of this camera, like using it as a webcam. It does have that feature when you plug it into your PC with a micro USB port. It brings up this menu which allows you to either connect it as a PC webcam or just in the charging mode, or even as a storage device. But even when I tried to just get a preview of what the image would look like with this as a webcam, I found some weird issues like this strange lines and flares on the side. I don't know if it's the issue with my USB connector or it's the problem with the camera's output, but this is definitely not serviceable. Another weird thing that I found, which again I think attributes to the bad software, is the way in which the videos are stored. Everything that this camera records gets written to a SD card that it takes in. After shooting with this for a while, I took out the SD card to take a look at the footage by putting it into my phone. Thankfully, my phone has an SD card slot. But after putting it in my phone and going through the files, I couldn't find any of the videos in the designated video folder. There weren't any pictures in the image folder as well, but for some reason there were a bunch of these weirdly named unrecognized file types under the lost.dir folder. Turns out the sizes of these closely resembled the video, and when I renamed them to .mp4, they were the files that the camera recorded. Now I don't know if my phone somehow messed it up when I took the SD card out of the camera, or if the camera had something to do with it, but yeah, I had to basically rename all these files to .mp4 extensions in order to use them. Yeah, that's pretty crappy, to be honest. I've never seen any other electronics do this, and I have seen some pretty cheap stuff in my life. Okay, you know what, I'm gonna cut this video short. There were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about this, but what's the point? It's gonna suck at all those anyway. So what's the verdict on the Akaso Brave 4? Yeah, don't buy this. Even if it had like bad quality footage and if everything else worked fine, then I would have still maybe recommended some of you to get it as an external webcam option. But thanks to this garbage software, nothing seems to work well. Even their own application doesn't work well. Like the Akaso DV, which is an Android application that allows you to remotely view the footage of this camera, apparently, doesn't connect to it despite connecting to the camera's built-in Wi-Fi. It kept on trying to connect to the camera and finally said it cannot connect. About the only serviceable thing that I found with the camera is the time lapses that it records, which are kind of okay. Provided that there is plenty of light and a good amount of movement, you can set the time lapse to go off at different time intervals, and it does look pretty decent if you're lucky. And yeah, you have to be pretty lucky to get away with good footage with this camera. But all in all, yeah, stay away from the Akaso Brave 4. I don't know about other Akaso models. I'll see if I can get my hands on others and see if they're equally bad or worse. I mean better. If you would like to take a look at some alternatives, there's the Ecamm 2K and the SJCam SJ4000. Maybe the Dragon Touch action camera is pretty good as well. I'll leave all those links in the description if you'd like to see them for yourself. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more unbiased, honest reviews like this. And with that said, until next time, take it easy and I'll see you soon. Cheers.